Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on advanced charge controllers. My name is Rob Rello, and with me in the background is Errol, as usual, to help answer questions and other things. We got a lot to cover today, so let's just go ahead and get started. As usual, with some of the little fine print there, this webinar will be recorded and will be up on our website, so you can go back. We are going to go a bit quick because there's a lot of information. So if you're missing something, or if you want to hear it again, for you to go back to the recording and play it again and try to see if you can pick up some additional information. So as always, that'll be recorded and available. And also, please put your questions in the question box, and we will try to get to those as we go or at the end if we had an answer before then. Again, my name is Rob Rallo. I'm a senior engineer at Sunwise. I am pushing now 30 years in the solar industry, mostly in off-grid. So I got quite a bit of experience there. Oh, and happy Pi Day, everybody, for those engineers out there. Today is 3/14. Sunwise has over 20 years, actually I think 25 years now, of off-grid design and manufacturing experience. Again, mostly in battery-based solar hybrid, UPS, and other types of applications. We have our headquarters is in Oregon. We also have warehouse manufacturing facilities in New York. We've got sales offices around the country. Some of the other products and services are, as I mentioned, we do standalone PV systems. We can do mobile ones, hybrid systems, CDC, which is also known as cycle charge, battery backup or UPS, as I mentioned before. We can also do custom modules. We can also just sell components as needed, and we can do sub-assemblies. It's not uncommon for us just to sell somebody a specific controller panel assembly for them, pre-assembled, pre-tested, ready to go. It can certainly shorten their installation time for them, as well as some other services. On the technical side and the engineering side, we can also do consultations. We can technical specification writing. We do some of that for some bid proposals. Of course, design engineering, do quite a bit of that for our customers. We can also do site surveys, kind of feasibility studies. We do provide complete system documentation. We can do trainings, as we're doing now. We can do specific ones for customers as well if requested. And of course, troubleshooting and other services like that. So let's get into today's material. We're going to start with just some basic charge controller functions before we get into the advanced. Then we're going to do just a real brief review of the charge controller types, and I'm going to refer you to the webinar on that one, so we won't spend a lot of time on that. Then we're going to get into the advanced charge control features. Then we're going to give some examples of those as well. So I think those are going to be the bulk of the presentation and the meat of the material today. So let's start with the primary purpose of the charge controllers. I liken this to the iPhones. I think it was like the iPhone 2 or 3 that couldn't make calls. Okay, if a charge controller can't properly charge your battery, it's not performing its primary function, because the primary function of the charge controller is to prevent the battery from being overcharged or undercharged. Okay, so its job is to charge the battery. That's its primary job function. And if it can't do that, I don't care what other features it has, it's pretty much worthless to you. Okay, kind of like having a smartphone. If it can't actually make calls, it can do all these other great things, but if it can't make a call, it's not very useful. So again, that is a very important function, and make certain that it can do that first before it does something else. Okay, again, and properly charging the battery is critical to the life. If it's not being properly charged, then you're not going to get the maximum life out of the battery. And batteries are quite expensive now. In most cases, in a lot of cases, it can be up to 40% of the cost of the system. So it's really important to have a good charge controller with a good algorithm with the correct settings to make certain you do get that maximum battery life. Okay, and to that extent, most controllers will have set points based on the battery voltage, and that should be temperature compensated. Again, temperature compensation, having those right set points, are going to be needed to make certain that that the algorithm for your battery is correct. Different batteries, even valve regulated batteries, can have some different charge settings as recommended by the manufacturer. Again, there can be differences between different AGM technologies or between AGM and a gel and things like that. As an example, we have here the TriStar PWM kind of little chart there, and it gives, they use diff switches. We're going to get into this in detail with regards to adjustable set points. But you can see they have 7 different standard settings, and then they have one for custom settings as well. If those voltages don't match up with what you need for your charging. And again, we're going to get into more detail when we get into some of the advanced features of charge controllers. Okay, just real brief on the charge controller types. There are 4 main types of charge controllers. There are shunt regulators, which would be, they're kind of old legacy stuff. You don't see a whole lot of those nowadays. The one that's out there, it's still common, is the ASC by Specialty Concepts. So that's an older unit. Again, I think that thing's been around since the 80s, so probably almost 30 years now. Then you've got series regulators. You don't see those around too much, but when you defeat the pulse width modulation feature of a PWM regulator, it actually defaults to a series regulator. So that's why we talk about that technology a little bit. I think one of the old units of those still out there is the MPR controllers. And we're going to talk about that unit specifically because it has some great advanced features. It's an old unit, but it still does stuff today that nobody else still does, believe it or not. It's kind of amazing to me that over 20 years now, it's still got features that are hard to find at a comparable price in products nowadays. And of course, the pulse width modulated, which is the most common you'll probably find, and the MPPT, which is becoming quite popular. So those 2 are the ones that you see most today. And again, if you want more details on that, I would refer you to our webinar on the charge controller types that we did a little while ago. I think that webinar goes into those types in details, how they function, what they do, and the difference between them, why I might want one over the other, as well as how you would size them and how you can troubleshoot them by understanding the way they work. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit more fine print again here. I just want you to know, Sunwise is a vendor agnostic company. Okay, so we're not tied to any specific vendor. Okay, we try to use the best product for the application. I think it's really important to understand that we're trying to use the best product. We're not owned by somebody that says we have to use this charge controller or this module or whatever it is. Again, we're trying to use what makes the most sense in an application. Also, there are many manufacturers and products available. And I'm saying this because it's hard to keep up with everything that's out there in the marketplace. So you may come back and say, hey, have you heard of this? Or do you know this could do that or whatever? And I may not know. To be blatantly honest, it's just difficult to keep up with everything nowadays. So, and then there are new ones coming to the market constantly. I know that Phocos is now coming out with a new low-end MPPT I just found out about, and there's some other stuff. But again, it's hard to keep up with everything going on. So we're just trying to, in this webinar, we're just going to try to give you a taste of some of the things you can do and try to give you a few examples. But this is this is not to be a complete list at all. Just to let you know, this is, again, just kind of a small sampling, and we're not even going to get into the details of these things. We could probably spend a webinar on each one of these charge controllers and some of their advanced features. So we're just going to try to focus on just some of the things they can do and try to give you an idea of what might be possible in case you come across that application. You may have an application now that you need that for, you didn't even know you could do, or you may have applications coming up and go, hey, I remember hearing something about that vaguely. Then you can go back and either go back to this webinar again, or perhaps pull out the manual for that product and go, oh yeah, that's how I do it, type of thing. Okay, and always, please feel free to contact us for help in double checking your design or the sizing. If you want help in trying to find the most cost-effective solution, again, we're not beholden to any specific vendor, so we can use whatever makes the most sense. And so again, we're here to try to help you in terms of trying to get you the best product and best system for your application. And by I mean best, it may not always be the cheapest, but it will be the most cost effective. And I say that because sometimes spending a little bit more money for the battery up front will save you a lot of money down the road. And again, we're not thinking just installation, we're also thinking 5 years down the road, is the system still functioning trouble-free for you? Okay, so now let's start getting into some of the advanced features. Now, I think the most obvious one that most charge controllers have, but I'm going to state anyway, is a low voltage disconnect. We're going to go into that in detail. Again, most of them have that. Most of them have some type of meter or display, and I've broken that up into both LED indicators, which is common on the low-end units, as a and then you can also get in the more advanced LCDs and stuff like that. And they're very important for error codes, and I'm going to talk about that when I get into the meters and displays. Adjustable set points, very important nowadays. We're going to talk about that in some more detail. Route monitoring control, also becoming very popular along with data logging. So those two go together really well, and we did a whole webinar on that a while ago, but I'm gonna talk about those features and why it is so important and how it can be easy to implement nowadays. We're gonna get that. Lighting control, diversion control. Some of you may or may not be familiar with that. Not used too much today, but again, it's one of these rare things you might just want to know about just in case. Alarms, generator control, I think that comes up sometimes, and some auxiliary controls, fans, intrusion detection, some stuff like that. We're going to get that in a little bit of detail. Some of these auxiliary controls allow you to think outside the box for stuff. We come up with things I hadn't even thought of for controls. So they allow you to pretty much, kind of create or invent your own thing. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. Okay, so let's start with the simplest, which is the low voltage disconnect. And again, I think most of you are familiar with it, but just to go over it again, low voltage disconnect disconnects the load from the battery when the battery reaches a low state of charge. Generally, these are based upon voltage. So when the battery voltage drops to a certain level, it will disconnect the load to protect the battery from being over discharged. Over discharging the battery can damage the battery and lead to premature failure. Again, this is one of these things where we want to try to maximize the life of the battery to save money. A lot of people, because their load is so critical, will sacrifice the battery for the load. But if you've designed your system correctly and it's functioning correctly, you really shouldn't ever have to need the low voltage disconnect. In other words, if your LVD is engaged, there's a bigger problem with the system because it really shouldn't happen. So it's one of these features that a lot of people don't want, but I think you should have, because if you're having that problem, there is another problem with the system. Generally, they auto reconnect when the battery gets recharged up a little bit. So it'll have typically you'll find it'll have a disconnect voltage and a reconnect voltage associated with that. Sometimes, depending upon the unit, those are fixed. Sometimes they might be adjustable. They might be adjustable on one or on both or something like that. Let's see, we mentioned that. Oh yeah, so one of the reasons to have a reconnect voltage is if you were to reconnect immediately, then it's just going to drop out immediately too, causing that load to go on and off, which is not good for the load, not good for the battery, not good for the system. So by allowing the battery to recover a little bit, it helps to minimize those problems, and it also helps the battery as well. So overall, although people don't like the, you may have to wait a day or two for the battery to get recharged, it is better overall for the system to do that than to have it just drop out again at night, then charge up during the day, and then drop out again the next day. Just the cycle just continues, which is what you do not want. Better to give it a day or two of no load than have it be okay again. But again, if you've got a low voltage disconnect, you've probably got a bigger problem with the system that needs to get looked into. And we got a whole webinar on troubleshooting if you want to get into that. Yep, as I just mentioned there. Okay, I already kind of covered that. Okay, let's move on to LED indicators. I know I mentioned displays. I'm going to break that up into both LEDs and displays because they are a little bit different. Some will have both and some will have one or the other. Most of your low-end charge controllers will have, as a minimum, at least a status LED of some form. And that LED is going to basically just tell you, yeah, it's functioning. It could indicate a charging status or the status of the unit. Sometimes it could be a red or a green LED, depending on what it's indicating. Sometimes it can flash to indicate charging status or perhaps a fault or an error. Some units may have multiple LEDs. They might have one for load status for an LVD model. So if it's red and on, then you know it's the LVD is engaged. Some might have a battery status. Some might have faults or errors on them. So they're all different kinds. Just depends on the manufacturer and what they decide to do with that. But as a minimum, I think almost every charge controller has as a minimum at least one LED telling you what's going on. And I mentioned the ASC shunt regulators before. Here's an example of that. It has just a simple one red LED that is on when it says the battery is charging. Pretty simple, but at least it tells you something's going on. This is an older, I thought this was kind of interesting. This is a sun saver, and this is an older unit. It only had 2 LEDs on it. This is their Gen 2. It has a green LED indicating that the battery is charging, and then it has a red LED for the low voltage disconnect. Now, this is their old one. Their newer one, their Gen 3, they added a whole bunch of additional LEDs. And what's neat is, so they still have that green one for the charging status, but they replaced the red one with a green, yellow, and red, indicating the battery status. It tells you, gives you an idea whether your battery is fully charged, somewhat charged, or not charged at all. And the red LED would kind of indicate the LVD, the low voltage disconnect going on there as well. So they used it for that. Now, they've also been able to use these LEDs and flashing patterns and sequences to give you error codes. I think there's like 5 or 6 different error codes, which gives you all kind of great feedback. Everything from, hey, you've shorted the lines on the array side, to you've shorted or have an overload on the load side, to you've reversed wired something and miswired something. Great feedback for installation and troubleshooting with those LEDs. So sometimes not having a display is okay if you've got some good LEDs with some good error codes. Even myself, I usually have to go back to the manual to look that up and see what it means. So I would also, just as a recommendation, say it's nice having these charge controller manuals with you, because most of these LEDs do flash telling you what's going on. So it's nice to have the controller manual with you to try to better understand what's going on when you get there and you see flashing LEDs. Okay, just again getting to some of these details, what they can do. The charging status one has multiple functions. If it's not on at all, you know it's night mode. If it's green, you know it's charging. If it's green and flashing, it tells you it's regulating. You don't know whether you're in float mode or absorption mode, but you know it's doing something. Okay, so it's gotten past the balk, which is a good thing. If you see it regulating, it's usually a good sign. And if it's red, you have an error, which is also important to know. You may not know what that error is. You may have to go to the manual and look at the other LEDs to figure out what's going on. But you do know there's a problem with that. So now let's move on to a display or a meter. Okay, and the LCD displays, and again, this depends upon the manufacturer as to what you might get with your charge controller. And I know we're looking at the Morningstar again. This is their latest ProStar we're looking at, their Gen 3. Generally can tell you array battery or load current. It can give you the battery voltage. All of those are very important things to have. It can also, again, control your charging status. And it'll tell you also in terms of the status, not just whether it is charging, but what mode it might be in, whether it's in float mode or absorption or something like that, which again can be nice to know, because it tells you that you are charging your batteries properly if you're getting the float and you're in the absorption. And then we give you some more details on the faults or errors, because it'll give you additional things like, I did not mention this or cover it, but there's also some of these units also have a high voltage disconnect to protect the load from high voltages. We had a problem with that this past winter, where there was some extreme cold in the Northeast and the HVD started kicking in. And one of the easy ways to find that out was you can just go to the display and scroll through to the error messages, and it says, hey, your high voltage is engaged. And then they were able to, again, to use the display to adjust the settings to prevent the system from getting that high voltage. You can either disable the high voltage alarm feature, you could raise the high voltage disconnect feature, or you could even just adjust the temperature compensation to prevent it from happening, or even set a max battery voltage on this unit. Other units, other manufacturers may have similar features or may not. Again, we're just trying to give you an idea of what is possible. And and again, there are so many different controllers out there, it'd be impossible to cover everything. So we're just going to try to give you an idea of what is possible with some of these units. Okay, set points. Very, very important. Adjustable set points can be incredibly helpful in ensuring the batteries are properly charged. I've mentioned that many times, and I'll continue to mention that, and it's becoming even more important with some of the newer technologies today. I would also refer you to the battery manufacturer for the recommended charge algorithm. I mentioned that before, that even with the valve regulated batteries, different manufacturers have different technology. They might want theirs charged a different way, even between the AGMs and the gels. Okay, so that one might want, say, 14.1 volts, might want 14.3 or something like that, and that little 0.2 volts could make a difference, actually. So in terms of extending the life of your batteries, maybe from 4 years to 5 years. So to get maybe an extra 10, 15, 20% out of the life of your battery, that little difference might matter. Okay. And it's becoming incredibly important with the new technologies like lithium ions as well. Here's an example, one that we did for customers specifically. We even put a special note on it saying this unit had been custom programmed for lithium ion batteries. We didn't want somebody to try to use it with those settings on a lead acid, because it would damage the lead acid. Lithium ion batteries and some of the other exotic technologies out there are using completely different algorithms, way more complicated, than the ones being used for the lead acid. So it's nice to be able to have some of these advanced charge controllers with these set points and with these advanced control algorithms, control features with these algorithms for these types of batteries. Again, one of the ones that we're using, some of the examples of the ones that we're using at Sunwise are Dragonfly. UPG is coming out with new ones talking about trying to keep up with technologies, and the controllers, batteries are the same way, NEC and others. So again, there's many out there. Okay. Again, set points are also, I mentioned that a high voltage disconnect thing that we were able to do. So all kinds of things that make it nice to have adjustable set points. Low voltage disconnects, some people want to play with those. Sometimes you can adjust the temperature compensation feature. We've got a whole tech note and webinar. We've covered that before in webinars, but different batteries want different temperature comps. Some might want -5 millivolts per degrees per cell. Some might want -3 or -4. So it's nice to have a charge controller that might be able to allow you to adjust that. So you can just dial that into your battery a little bit better and give that battery just a little bit more life. Equalization, most manufacturers don't recommend it, but some might want it once a year or something like that. So it's nice to be able to have that either in a manual or automatic, especially if you can adjust it to say, hey, I only want it to equalize once a month or something like that. So having that capability might be useful. Max battery voltage, I mentioned that before with the high voltage problem. It's nice to be have to set that so that can be limited, as well as adjusting that max temperature compensation. Getting back to the temperature comp again, not just changing the coefficient itself, but perhaps setting it. Some manufacturers, like for instance, Deca batteries, will want temperature compensation, but they want to limit it. They want to limit it on the high end to like, I think it's like -50°C. They don't want to adjust past that. And on the low end, I think it's 0°C or somewhere around there. They don't want to adjust past that. So some manufacturers actually want to set limits for temp comp. So it'll be nice to be able to do that as well. Again, it just helps to try to get that battery a little bit extra life. And many more features. Like I said, we could spend a whole lot of time just covering this stuff. Okay, so now let's move on to how they can be adjustable. And again, there's a whole array of stuff there as well. Some of the simple ones might use a jumper. And I know a lot of people might be thinking the Sun Saver and the jumper on that one. But I also mentioned the C40s, the old Trace, now Xantrex, and now Schneider Electric C40s use a jumper to adjust that stuff. They can be done by dip switches, also pretty common. You can do it through the display, which is also really handy. And sometimes their computer connection. MSView is the one used in Morningstar, but it could be a direct serial cable with another product. And the neat thing about some of these computer connections is this can be done remotely with the use of a gateway. And we're going to get into that in more details as we start talking about remote communications. So that's kind of a neat, handy feature to have as well. And there are other methods too. I know Phocos actually uses an infrared device to program theirs. So there can be all kinds of stuff. There might be something else I didn't even mention. Who knows? Like I said, there's all kinds of things out there. But as long as, I think the bottom line is, it doesn't really necessarily matter how, as long as you have that capability and that allows you to adjust it to your batteries. Although, we'll be honest, the computer connection with remote communications, really handy. That allows you to kind of optimize stuff remotely. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail when we start talking about remote communications, which is actually right now. So many controllers now have local communication ports on them. Many of the Morningstar products do, and many other products. The Outback products do as well with the Flex Max. And again, there's just many other controllers now, and more adding it. This allows you to connect to them either locally or remotely. And it just gives you incredible ways to now be able to work with these units. It allows you to control these advanced features more easily, allows you to do it on site or remotely. We're going to get into that. I think I'm going to try to talk a little bit more about some of those examples, how that can work. Some of these, sometimes this can be pretty easy to do. It may require a special hardware, like a special cable or an adapter to do that, but it's incredible to have. They can be used to download, when you can do this even locally, you can be used to download error codes or data or upload new firmware and setpoint files. I know with a lot of these manufacturers that have these, if you have many sites, you may have, say, who knows, 20, 30, 60, 100 sites, and you've created the set points for these batteries and for your systems. You've created these set points just the way you want it. A lot of the manufacturers allow you then to just have a file that you can just download quickly into each charge controller as it goes down in a line. As you're testing it, you can program the unit, test it, and pack it up and get it out the door very efficiently. So a lot of them allow you to do that with these local cables connected to a computer. Really handy to have. Let's see, some of these will have the Ethernet option for being able to communicate remotely. Again, additional hardware will be required for that. And sometimes you may have to use proprietary software. I mentioned the Morningstar with the MSU before. That's a common one. I know Phocos is a different one for their product. I forget the name of it. Outback Power has their own stuff. Let's see. MPR controllers have their own version as well. That's called MPRcom. So again, a lot of them have their own. Generally, the software is free. That's the good news, is that even if you have to have one for each, they don't charge you for it. Generally, in most cases, it's free. Matter of fact, I can't even think if somebody charges for that nowadays. And some even have web-based options. Again, the Outback stuff, sometimes it's web-based. I know Morningstar is working on their web-based options right now. I'm not certain the status of it. Been hearing about it for about a year now, over a year now, but I know they're working on web-based options as well. They may even have something beta testing, I think. Anyway, these options also allow you to send alerts and alarms. Sometimes it can be done by emails or text. Again, really handy to have if you got a low voltage alarm to send that out so that you have a problem. It might give you a day or two to get up to the site and correct it before your load actually goes down. It can monitor voltages and currents. I'm going to get into that in more detail, but that is incredibly handy to have. Again, you can create graphs for trending, which can prevent problems before they occur. And I'm going to even show you some examples of that in just a second. And you can remotely control loads and generators. Really neat idea. Think about this now. You can now remotely control loads and generators. So if you log in and see that your batteries are in a low state of charge, you can perhaps start that generator, recharge it manually if you wanted to, or you may have multiple load disconnects. You don't have to have just one LVD. With these advanced controllers and these advanced features, you might have multiple LVD options, and you can disconnect the non-critical loads first and save the critical loads for later, or perhaps not even disconnect the critical loads at all. You may want to sacrifice the batteries for those. So just some things you can do, you want to think about with this. Now, the neat thing is that, and I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to kind of harp on this just a little bit, is that the hardware to do this is not expensive. The software is free. Okay. Now, what ends up getting kind of expensive is the communication method. But I'm noticing more and more now that our customers have the communications built in. On security systems, they're already transmitting this stuff via Ethernet, via the internet. Again, on our SCADA stuff, there's communications. All the communications now are starting to go down this path anyway of being internet-based, of being network-based. And it's not a big deal for them just to run another cable to the router over to the charge controller and get all this information. And for just a small cost in the hardware, the capability it gives you can save you so much money down the road of being able to look at this stuff and be able to remotely control it, make changes, optimize the design by changing set points perhaps remotely. That's, again, it gets back to that feature of being able to have adjustable set points by the computer, being able to do this remotely to optimize that algorithm on the batteries. You can download the files later, look at these currents and battery voltages and say, hey, it's getting charged properly, it's not getting charged properly. You might find out you have a problem with shading or something like that. Why was it working fine in the springtime and now 2 months later I'm having issues? Well, it's because the trees have all blossomed and you've got leaves covering your array now, type of thing. So incredibly capable. I mean, what it would cost to send a technician to a site to find these things out, you might be able to get a lot of information up front. So a few $100s in hardware can save you a whole lot of money on the back end, and having to send somebody out or having the site go down. So again, it's becoming probably one of our most popular features to have. And if you, and I'm going to say this, if you don't have the capability with your communications on site, and I'm thinking like 75% of our customers do now, if you don't, then we can add that as well. Let's see, I already mentioned this, troubleshooting, optimizing designs. Yeah, we have a whole webinar on remote communications if you want to go look into that in more detail. But what I want to show you is an example. We just did this for a customer recently. We actually added a cell modem to the site, and we can even provide a cell plan. We actually have AT&T. We have we can sell you a data plan as well to go with it, so we can actually handle all of that for you. So this is just an example of a couple of TriStars. We have one for the charge controller, one for the load controller. And again, we've got some additional stuff in there that's highlighted. We've got some adapters in there. This is the cell modem itself. We have a converter to power up all that stuff because this stuff runs on a different voltage. But we can do all of that. And here's just a little display of using MSView of, yeah, we were able to communicate with this thing remotely. It's got a SIM card in it. And we were able to remotely communicate with it. And yeah, I can find these units. These are the numbers that popped up. So yeah, it found them, and it can now communicate with it remotely and look at stuff and make changes. So getting back to that data, one of the nice things to get out of these units is the data itself. And some of these units you can either plug in, it gets back again to the local connection. If a technician goes out there, he or she could perhaps download that data locally. If you can get it remotely, even better. Again, and you can track data, as I mentioned, to prevent problems before they occur. You can check on the health of a battery, and you can check on solar array production and the load consumption. Again, if the load is consuming more than you think it is, this is a good way to find that out before you actually cause damage to the batteries or have the system go down. You can either try to find a way to reduce the load consumption by maybe changing your polling frequency or something like that, or you may have to increase the solar array. But again, you can do that before you actually start having problems. So it's very handy to be able to log this stuff and look at it. If your solar array production drops, like I said before, you may have a problem with, could be bird droppings, could be, shading for something because the seasons have changed or something like that. So you may have put it in the field and somebody planting corn that's growing up around it. Had that problem before. One of my troubleshooting webinars, I showed an example of that on the site. So again, just some of the things you can get from data logging and remote communications. Data logging itself can range from all kinds of things. You can get, depending upon the charge controller, how much storage it has, the manufacturer, you might get things from daily averages and min maxes to logged intervals. Sometimes logged intervals can even be adjustable from everything from 5, 15, or 60 minutes type of thing. So it just depends upon the charge controller and the manufacturer and what they decide to do for that product. And again, we've got other webinars on that stuff. Here's an example of some real data that I got from a customer. I helped them troubleshoot it. This came out of a Morningstar product. They sent me the raw data files. I was able to load it in Excel, create some graphs. And what is neat about this one is it actually shows the problem. It shows the battery voltage here on the red line being very low. Battery voltage is shown. I've actually graphed the current on one side, the voltage on the other, and the time of date are down here. Although my scale's a little messed up on that one, but that is the basically the timeline down below. And what's interesting here is you will notice that the load current's pretty much flat. It's pretty constant load for the most part. You will notice that the battery voltage is low. This is right around 48, 49 volts. This is just above the LVD. It did not quite get into it, but it was just above it. But we realized we were having a problem with the solar array. You can see kind of the solar array current not quite right. As it turns out, they went out, they inspected the solar array, they found a problem of some of it was not connected correctly. So they did not have the full solar array. They had partial, which is how they were able to limp along, but they did not have the full array. Now, if they would have continued running like this, these battery plates would have sulfated because the battery wasn't getting fully charged. And they never would have known this because the load wasn't going down. So the system was kind of limping along, but they could have had problems. Again, the system could have gone down if they would have encountered some bad weather, but worse yet, they probably would have sulfated the battery plates and caused damage to the batteries. But by being able to download this, look at this information, they were able to figure out, oh, geez, we got a problem. So the tech out the array, fixed the array, and you can actually see where it was fixed. This is the tech working on the array. You can kind of see it chopping around, and this is where it's fixed. Look at this beautiful line. This is the bulk charge here. This is the absorption cycle. And then this is the float cycle. This is now nighttime mode. And you can see how beautiful this curve is now, telling me this is exactly what you want to see. I know my batteries are being perfectly charged now. These batteries are going to have a nice long life. Over here, I can see I got problems. Over here, I can see it perfectly. So I use this as a great example of what you can do remotely and how powerful it is to be able to do this remotely before you have problems and cause damage to very expensive products and parts. Okay, so let's move on from that. I know I harped on that quite a bit, but again, I think it's just a really cool feature to have and how powerful it is. And again, we're finding it more and more, especially with customers already having that Ethernet capability, that network capability already on site. It's not a big deal just to run a cable over the charge controllers now. Okay, so lighting control. Again, we've already done a webinar on that one, so I'm not going to get into that in huge detail. But just kind of remind people that a lot of these charge controllers have that. Even if it doesn't specifically tell you that, you'd be surprised. A lot of them have that in the background. The new ProStore Gen 3s have that as a feature. It's just one of those little things that has in the background. Doesn't specifically state that, but if you look at the manual, it'll tell you how to do it. The Phocos Dingo has that feature in it. Phocos has got specific problems just for that. So does Morningstar, like for products specifically named like the Sunlight controller, which is specifically designed for that. But there might be ones that aren't. You can actually convert a TriStar to do lighting control, by the way. So there are products that you maybe didn't even know you could do lighting control with that you can. So again, you might want to just either, again, feel free to contact us. We can help you with that, or look at the manual of the charge control you're working with and see if that's a feature or not. And the reason they can do this is because the solar array itself is nothing but a giant photocell. Okay, and that's why they can do it. Most of them use the solar array voltage to detect sunrise and sunset. So generally, when the sun is up and in full, that voltage is pretty constant for the solar array. But during sunrise and sunset, that voltage is going to rise and fall. And they can actually make that threshold adjustable depending upon the charge controller. Some you can, some you can't. I'll go back to the sunlight. That one's not adjustable, but with the ProStars you can. So you can actually adjust that sunlight level, and that can be very handy. If you're in the city, we have a lot of light pollution. Perhaps you might want to adjust that to be a little less sensitive. So you might want to go to a slightly higher voltage for that to disconnect, type of thing. So again, there are things you can do to do that as well. Kind of handy to have. And some of them have just basic dusk to dawn features and that's it, or perhaps dusk to X hours. I put X in there. It could be hey, I want it to be from sunset to for 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours, whatever it is. Some could get even more advanced than that. Some could do from you want a few hours, like I don't know, like sunset for 6 hours and then with 2 hours before sunrise type of thing. You can do that. And some of them can get even more advanced. Some of them can use this, and not necessarily for lighting control, but almost the exact opposite app, because it's detecting the sunlight and it knows when day is and night is. You can flip it around and you can say, hey, I want this load only on from dawn to dusk instead of dusk to dawn. Somebody might go, well, why would you want that? Well, you might want that for a kiosk that only works during the day. You may have a park or something like that where people aren't supposed to be there, at sunset type of thing at night. So if they're only there during the day, then let's only have the kiosk or whatever that load is operate during the day. So that's features. And some of these have timers that allow you to do things in between. Let's say you only want the load to run for 8 hours a day during the day, but you don't really care, you're not specific. It doesn't have to necessarily be from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. type of thing. It doesn't have to be that specific. It could be, plus or minus an hour. Some of them allow you to say, hey, I'll do 4 hours before solar noon and 4 hours after solar noon or something like that type of thing. So again, all kinds of advanced features and controls in there now with all kinds of products. I know again, I'll go back to the Dingo from Phocos can do it. The new ProStars can do it too, and many other ones. Again, I said that early on. I know I keep mentioning specific ones just because those are the ones I'm a little more familiar with, but there are many other products out there that can do these things as well. Diversion controller, another feature you can do with these things. What a diversion controller is that, well, let me back up just a second. Most charge controllers either open circuit or short circuit the solar array for control. Short circuit would be the shunt regulator. Everything else just opens it. So basically, it's just disconnecting the array when the batteries get to full state of charge. Some devices do not like to be open circuited or short circuited. Okay, examples are wind, micro hydro. Okay, so what they prefer to do is they want to dump the excess energy because they want the thing to still keep spinning. It's mostly spinning devices, whether it be a wind turbine or the turbine on a micro hydro. They want to keep spinning. Okay, so what you do is when the batteries, but you don't want to overcharge the batteries. What you would do is you would then divert that energy, which is how you get the name diversion controller, to a load dump, typically a resistor. Okay, but it could be something else. But typically they would dump that to a resistor, and it's usually dump this heat into something. So that's what a diversion controller does. Let's see. So again, not something you come across a lot, but again, if you're working with some of these things, the Primus wind machines work differently. They don't do that. They have a different way of operating, but some of the bigger wind machines, some of the ones in the kilowatt and up range, work this way. They work with the load dump. So again, just letting you know if you do come across such products, that's how you would do it. And what's interesting is there are a couple of really old products that do that, because that was a popular way to do regulation back in the old days. So I mentioned the C40 before. It's still out there. It's one of the features it does. And actually, the Morningstar TriStar is actually named for that exact thing. It has 3 separate features. It does 3 separate things, which is how it gets the Tri name. One is just charge controller, solar charge controller. The other one is load controller for your LVD. And the last one, the third feature, is a diversion controller. And that's how I got its name, the TriStar. Okay, I mentioned these specifically. Some other ones can do it actually with relay drivers. You can do it with a relay driver from Morningstar and also with auxiliary relays on the Dingo. Again, I'll mention that one. I think you can do it with auxiliary relays on the Outback FlexMax units too. And I'm going to talk about those when I start talking about examples of these things. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next topic. We mentioned some with the auxiliary contacts, you can do some of those things like the word diversion, but you can also do a whole bunch of other things with auxiliary contacts. So with auxiliary contacts, you can do alarms, you can do generator control, you can do additional load disconnects, you can do additional array controls and disconnects. So you can do multiple staged on those. You can do high voltage, low voltage alarms, gen start and stop, all kinds of. You can control fans if you have a temperature thing. You can use them to do intrusion detection. I'll talk about that a little bit more when it comes specifically to examples. But again, just a whole lot more things. Almost the sky's the limit of these things. I'm certain you could probably think of even more things I can even think of that you can do. Once you start having things connect together, once you start having things communicate together, getting back to those communications again, having like a relay driver communicate with a TriStar, you can do all kinds of stuff, or a Dingo with what it can do, or the FM FlexMax units communicating with the inverters and things like that. You've got all these different things you can do with these units, and then you start adding in these remote communications again that allows you to be able to start and stop the generator remotely. So you could dial into, say, the relay driver or connect to it, and you can tell it I want the generator to start and stop or something like that. I want to turn some fans on or off or whatever. All kinds of things you can do. Loads, you might want to turn off a load in the wintertime. You know, let's say we don't have as much power from the solar array, so I can't support this load in the wintertime. Now let's shut it off. Let's shut it off for the season. You can dial in and do that by just clicking a relay type of thing. So again, all kinds of things you can do with these auxiliary contact options, whether it just be a simple dry contact for an alarm or a generator or something even more advanced. Okay, so now let's move on to some examples. Okay, and just some quick examples of some advanced charge controllers. I mentioned the TriStar before. We also got the MPPT, which has built-in Ethernet capability, and the 600-volt units as well. They've got those. Outback, I mentioned the FM 1680 many times. They got a new unit out, the 100 as well. It's a brand new unit. Phocos Dingo, I mentioned that one. Phocos has got some other products too. They got some really way cool stuff for lighting control as well, some of their other products for that. But I'm going to talk with the Dingo in a little more detail because it's got some really way cool stuff. Morningstar Relay Driver, again, because it has some other way cool features too that make that thing really flexible. I mentioned the digital Solar MPR before. Again, old product, but my goodness, bang! I mean, the features of this thing, it's a great value for what you can do with it. It's amazing. If you need a whole lot of features, it's a good value to it. And also, I know I kept mentioning the Outback stuff, but Magnum, the PT100, same thing. It's very similar with the FM. It's got some cool features and functions as well. So let's try to get into some of these. I don't have time to cover all of them, but I'm going to get into some in a little more detail, so we can talk about what they can do. Okay, so let's get into the FM 1680, and actually the 100. I'm sorry, the 100 just came out, so I did not get this updated for that. But the 100 also has auxiliary contacts, so it has the same thing. So these units both have got auxiliary outputs. The auxiliary output is 12 volts at 200 milliamps. Okay, and basically it's used to control the secondary relay. So basically that output then gets wired to the coil on another relay, and then that relay can be used to do all kinds of stuff. Okay, so here's just what you got. You got your auxiliary output terminals right here. These are your regular wire terminals. This unit also has a remote. You've got your remote temp comp as well. It's also got the RJ45 for connecting to the mate and the hubs. You can kind of see it's got the remote communications, remote temp sensors, and some other features with it as well. Okay, and again, it can be used for, so you can use that additional contact for an LVD. You can have a control relay on and off. You can do the diversion controller the same way with that. You can also have it do a fan control. So remember, you're also, because of that, I'll go back a second, because of that remote temp sensor, you're measuring temperature. So now you can do something on that temperature. Hey, it's getting too hot. Let's turn a fan on my battery box or something like that. Okay. Okay. It has another neat feature as well, something I didn't even know about until I actually started reading up on this, a little more detail going through the manual. It has something called float mode. And what that is that when the battery is in float mode, when the battery is fully charged and floating, it can divert the extra power somewhere. And that can be used to, I don't know, charge another set of batteries. It can be used to heat something. So now, basically, what it does is so now you have this extra power. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. I mean, it's up. It's it's like it's up. I guess to you as a user of these things, to maybe help find some reasons where you may want to use that. You may want to charge another set of batteries. You may want to use it to heat something up. I don't know. But now you have this option of, hey, I've got extra energy. What do I want to do with it? I can dump it somewhere. And again, that gets back to that diversion control thing of it. Was that
you could run a small water pump. You could run a small water pump to only pump water when you have excess energy.
There's another good example. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. Again, I'm just trying to give people small examples, but I'm certain they're going to come with a whole lot more than I can with some of these features. Okay, so let's move on to the Dingo. The Dingo has data logging in it. Nice unit. It's got additional terminals for generator control run on the unit, and it includes a real-time clock. I forgot to mention that as another feature. A lot of these units do not have a real-time clock, which means you cannot do time-of-day control. The Dingo does. A really nice feature if you want that load to be on from 9 to 5 or not. You may want it to only be on at night, type of thing. So it's got that feature in it, which can be handy. Okay, and this is just kind of again, it just shows the terminals in the Dingo. You can see it's got these G terminals are specifically used for the generator, but you can use the control other stuff as well. It's also got the temp sensors I mentioned before. You can do a remote temp sensor with that, and that allows you to do some temperature control as well. Okay, and these are just your regular power terminals there. Okay, so as I mentioned, these G terminals can be used for other things like alarms, additional load control, additional rate control. I mentioned that before, but that's true. What's neat is I'll go back to the relay driver with a TriStar. You can say, hey, I'm starting to regulate. Let's turn this, you can have a really big solar array instead of having to have it all go through a solid state controller like the TriStar or something else like that, which has a lot of heat. With those transistors, you could send it through a relay, which simply turns it on and off. And it doesn't really damage the batteries because you still have the finish charge. You can still do the absorption and the float with the TriStars. So another neat thing you can do, and I mentioned the TriStars, but there's a reason why you can't do that as well with the FM 60s or 80s, or perhaps the Dingo. Another example of something you can do. So again, you can do additional relay control. You can do a simple on-off series control on a big solar array on some of the other ones, and then do your finish charge for your batteries. Nothing wrong with that at all. And again, it's a way you might be able to handle a big array more cost effectively than putting in 6 or 8 solid state PWM controllers. It's just an option for you. And again, so you can do the load control. The load control has the LVD. It does lighting and time of day. I mentioned with that real-time clock. Nice feature to have. Some of the communications options, you need adapters for these. You have an RS-232, a USB, because most computers don't have an RS-232 anymore, and the Ethernet. I'll mention the Morningstar products are the same thing. They have an RS-232 option and USB option as well, and an Ethernet. They have the same thing on most of those now. It also has an external shunt adapter. Really handy feature to have that allows up to 3 current measurements. Great thing to have. Let's say you've added the wind turbine to your system, but you have no idea how it's functioning. You're not seeing the current out of it. How do I measure the current? This allows you to add that as a feature. So you can do some similar stuff. Again, I'll go back to the OutProc product with the FlexNet DC. It can do the same thing. You have external shunts where you can measure stuff. This has it too in the Dingo. So another neat feature to have. Morningstar does not. I have bugged them about that for years, and they still don't have that feature yet. Drives me nuts because it's kind of handy to have. I'll also say not just, I know I focus on the wind machine, but you can also use it to measure additional loads, especially if you have loads going through inverters and stuff like that where you're not measuring that current. It'd be nice to find a way to measure it. So having external shunt is another good feature to have. And another good reason to have it would be to be able to measure that load remotely to see just how much power it is drawing. So another nice thing to have. Again, and I mentioned several other feature products that have it besides the Dingo. just again, some of the examples you can do of a dingo. I mentioned that second solar array. Here's an example. You can see those G relays going over to the coil on a relay, which then allows you to actually, in this case, it can be used to charge a secondary battery. You can shift it over to that, as well as the primary one, or you can just have them both in the primary. All kinds of things you can do here with this thing. And again, you can do this with a relay driver. It's another option if you wanted to stick with a Morningstar product versus a Phocos Dingo. But again, just small examples of stuff you can do with these things. It's just amazing. Here's one doing multiple solar array controls using a Dingo. And again, the relay driver can do exactly the same thing. And this is a PWM controller. You can do the finish charge again with this one solar array. You just disconnect them as you go along. Again, you have the additional load control over here, and this has you got the shunt measuring the generator. That's going through a computer interface device. You can check this thing remotely or locally. This is probably a really example of a large system, but again, there's a reason why you can't. This would be maxing it out, but hey, things you can do if you wanted to. And again, I mentioned the relay driver here. It can do all the same things that Dingo can in conjunction with, say, a TriStar or TriStar MPPD, or even the new ProStars now. The ProStars allow you to communicate with it as well. Again, so you can do all those things with it. We have a specific webinar we did on the relay driver about a year ago. So if you want to know more about that product, you can go to that. So we have one just specifically on that. As I mentioned before, I'm going through this quickly because, again, I could spend the webinar on each one of these controllers to get through all of the features. So I'm just trying to give you a sampling of things you can do. It's got 4 independently controls channels. They are typically used for, they typically require external relay because, again, they're solid state, so they would typically require you to add an additional relay to that. And as I mentioned, I would suggest you look at our advanced solutions for off-grid systems for that webinar on that one. But some of the things the channels can be used for: generator control, high voltage, low voltage, and other alarms, an additional low voltage disconnect, additional rate control, as I showed before with the Dingo type of thing, fan control, because it could get the temperature from the TriStar or other unit, and many other things. One of the other neat things about the channels are, it can also be used as an input. I don't know of anybody else's device that can do that, but this one can. You can actually flip those channels around that use as an output or as an input. And with an input, you can use it for intrusion detection by noticing if a door's been opened or something like that, putting a simple contact on the door, either magnetic or mechanical, that when it's been opened, you can check that. A little fuel sensor. You could also use it, perhaps even you can use it for a level sensor, not just in a fuel tank, but perhaps in a water tank. I know Errol mentioned water pumping earlier. There's another good one. You can get feedback from that. You can get generator fault. This thing does generator control, so you can use one of the channels to turn the generator on and off, and you can use another channel to get, hey, a lot of generators will have a dry contact closure when there's a fault. You can get that back, and then you can communicate remotely. That then can be sent through your Ethernet back to you saying, hey, I have a generator problem, so we need to go out and fix a generator. And again, just all other kinds of things you can do with this stuff that has a binary input. Again, it's a simple binary input. It's either on and off, okay? Okay, no, I'm really rushing now because we're running out of time. The MPR controller, I mentioned that a few times before. It is an advanced standalone and hybrid system controller. Again, it is not something you want to use in a smaller, simple system. It is an expensive unit, but when you look at all the features it packs into it, it's actually a pretty cost-effective unit. It has standard RS-232 communications. Ethernet's optional. It has an optional data logging, and this one is logging intervals. I recommend 15-minute intervals, by the way, when you have those. Any more than that, you're getting too much data. Any longer than that, if you go to like a 30-minute or 60-minute interval, it may not be capturing the resolution and detail that you need. So I've been doing data logging on these things for going back to the early 90s, and I've played around with it, and 15 minutes seems to be about the right number. Let's see. Again, it has standard high voltage and low voltage alarms and advanced generator control built into it. I mean, advanced, I mean, it can also do controls based upon current as well as voltages. Kind of a neat thing to have for battery charging because it has shunts in it that can also measure wind and rectifier currents as well. So you can have those things run through it. You can pick up the shunt and capture that information. And based upon that, you can do some generator control as well. So some of the neat things you can do with it. Also, they're customized design. To be honest, one of the big problems with them are, the other big problem is they have a long lead time because all of their units are custom made to order. They don't have a standard off-the-shelf product you can just buy like the other manufacturers. They are made to order. So it's probably one of the negatives is that they are kind of a long lead time. They can be anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks depending upon what else they have going at their shop at the time. But let me show you an example of some of the screens you got out of this thing. This is a status screen from it. It just shows you the status, what's going on. It gives you battery voltages. It tells you your battery amp hours, state of charge, all kinds of stuff. It does have a real-time clock in it again, so you can do load control based upon that. You can see it's measuring currents. It's measuring amp hours for the day type of thing. It's got alarm indicators at the bottom, just a quick status snapshot screen to tell you what's going on. This is logged data. This is logged actually in 5-minute intervals. I can see the time right there. So it gives me the date and the time. So I can see the logged, XP is logged every 15 minutes. It gives me the battery voltage, array current, load current at that time. Okay. It also tells me how many hours the generator's run. Again, this has got advanced generator control, so I know how many hours the generator's running in minutes, something you may not get from some of the other products. Oh, it also keeps track of other things like the alarms as well. This isn't the full screen. It kind of goes off to the right a little further. And again, this can be exported to a Excel file and you can graph it, or you can graph it right in the program. Again, this is actually 20-year-old technology, but their software, which is free, does all this stuff for you. And this is a graph. This is kind of a funky graph, actually, to be honest, of a array current and battery voltage, but just some of the stuff you can do with it. Not certain what the data is because it does look a bit funky, so that might be made up data, not real data. But anyway, the other neat thing about it is that it's got maps, and I think there are a couple other manufacturers are starting to go this way now. But again, this has been around since the late 90s. This is nothing new, and yet they have maps that have sites on it, and if the site has an issue, if it has an alarm, it pops up as red, as an example there. That site has a red dot on it because it has an alarm. If everything's good, it's green. It pulls the site on a frequency that you want to. You can either check the sites once a day and download data. And again, this is all built into the software of this MPR com software that's free with the MPR controller. And you can do all these things with it. Again, the neat thing is the map here. You can click on it, and you can go to it directly and look at what's going on, or it'll contact you if there's an alarm or something like that, or you can pull it to download the data and things like that. So kind of a neat, cool feature with it. So, and again, I mentioned that we've got a whole bunch of other stuff on our website with tech notes, webinars. I'll refer you to the product manufacturers. Again, I found a lot of stuff out just by reading the manuals on these controllers. I didn't, as an example, the FM1680, that float feature, didn't know what had it. So it's neat to sometimes read the manuals. You might find out these things can do more than you realize they can do. Okay, we've got just a couple minutes left for questions. I apologize. I only went through this quick, but again, I was trying to cover a whole lot of stuff in a short amount of time. So let's see what questions you might have.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. I do have a couple questions. Let's see here. First of all, I'll just make a comment that there are many manufacturers, as we've mentioned several times, that we weren't able to cover. Somebody mentioned that they are a big fan of Midnight products and find them easy to use. We actually do represent Midnight as well. The classics are great products. Just one of those exampms of not enough time or space to cover all of them. One that I'd like to bring up.
Yeah, no, and I agree 100%. I just remember we mentioned some of their products have got some great lighting control features too. Remember we covered that in the remote communications webinar and the lighting control ones. So yeah, yep. I mean, again, they have advanced features in those products. As I said before, I could do a webinar on each one of the manufacturers, or even each one of the products. And maybe we'll even think about doing that in the future, perhaps. But again, just trying to give people general ideas, and yep, absolutely, that there are many other products out there. And again, the Midnight Solar's got some great products, and we do represent them. We do use your products as well.
Yep. So just a quick comment. All right. So we do have a question from Robert Williams. Rob, you may want to pull up the questions box so that you can see this as well. I'm just going to read it verbatim, but you might want to look at it. Are controllers you're referencing able to maintain batteries with proper profile settings when transitioning between daily load when occupied, high battery cycle, versus minor load when unoccupied?
Interesting question.
There was an initial question, Rob, too, that you may want to look at the top
Okay.
about Morningstar. Basically they're, honestly, just let you read it because it'll probably be easier.
Yeah, I'm trying to, let me see.
In the meantime, if anybody else has questions, I encourage you to put them in the chat box. We'll go
through them. There's a lot of questions there. I'm trying to get through a bunch of them to try to find that one. Let's see here. I think it would, again, depend upon the charge control and the algorithms and what you can adjust for that. So I think it might be possible, but again, it would depend upon that charge controller, what you can adjust, and the specific algorithms that you can program it to do, type of thing. So I would think it would be possible, but again, I would probably need to know a little more detail about the application and what's being, what they're trying to do. And then I could probably recommend a charge controller that could probably do that for them specifically. But again, a lot of these have a lot of features, and I'm certain one of them would be able to do this. Again, it would just depend on the specific profile they're trying to maintain, and then being able to control to do that profile. I think that's the key there is what is the profile and which one can actually do that.
And Robert, as well, I gave our email addresses. If you'd like to take that offline, we can certainly get with you and Morningstar directly to dig into that as necessary. I did have one other question / comment, Rob. Somebody was asking about a 10 amp charge controller that had both lighting controls and the capability to do custom programming for lithium batteries. I believe I remember seeing some examples of the sun savers in use with the Sinopoly lithium batteries. So is there custom programming for the sun savers?
Sun savers can't do lighting control. I probably recommend, it may be bigger than they want, but the one that comes to mind right off the top of my head would be a ProStar 15, the Generation 3.
That's the one.
Certainly do that.
That's the one I mentioned. What about
the Phocos has got some stuff too. Yeah, Phocos has got some stuff as well. I think their CIS could do that, and perhaps some other products. But yeah, Phocos has got a couple that can do it as well. I forget the exact products. I think the CIS was one of them, but they can.
Do you know if any of the CIS off the top of your head can do custom programming?
Yeah, they're the ones who use the infrared. Yes, they can, but it requires this funky infrared adapter. Yeah, but yes, they can.
Okay. Yeah, then that probably would be a good answer. I'd have to spend a moment to look in, but probably there is a version of the CIS rated at 10 amps that has lighting that has custom programmable set points. So I think that would be a good option.
Yeah.
What about the sun lights? Is there lithium battery programming on the sun lights?
Well, the problem with the sun lights don't really have much programming. They have basically you have voltage settings and that's it, which is probably not what you want the lithium-ion batteries. I mean, I think it's like, your charge setting is either like 14.1 or 14.3, and that's it. You've got no other control of that unit. So I mean, so I would not recommend it for lithium-ion where you need a little bit more advanced charge algorithm.
Hopefully it looks good because I pulled the trigger on it. No,
all right, I'll give folks another 30 seconds or a minute to get any last minute questions. I don't want to rush folks. If people are in the process of putting together a thought, don't be hesitant. No questions are dumb questions. We're here to help and answer. So I'll give folks just one more moment in case there are any lingering thoughts.
Yeah. In the meantime, what is our next webinar coming up?
2 weeks, I believe. We will have a webinar on mounting and structures.
Okay, and then I think we're going to repeat the solar wind hybrid webinar. We're going to do that one with products again later on in March. Yep.
In April 18th.
Sorry, April. All right. Sorry, that's right. April or March. Right. That's right. Yes. Yep. Sorry.
And those will all be posted. Those are posted with the registration links on our webinars page in case you're interested in looking at those.
Yep. And I'm still working on some, just so everybody else know on the line too, that I'm still working on even some more advanced stuff with regards to the hybrids and stuff like that. So there will be some more advanced webinars coming up again as well. And if you, again, as always, if you've got some topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to send us an email and let us know. We're always looking for ideas and for topics and materials. So, shoot us a note. We're going to do one on fuel cells too. It's becoming a popular topic. We're going to do one on that coming up soon. That's going to be a joint one with a fuel cell manufacturer. That one may be later in April, probably most likely May. Working on that as well. So just some ideas of things we'll be covering. But again, if you've got a topic, please let us know. Always looking for new stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, oh wait, we got one more. Anything for less than 60 amp? This was on the default. There was a question on what would you recommend besides the Outback unit as a controller with an Ethernet port for remote direct access. I mentioned the TriStar 60 amp MPPT because that has the Ethernet built in natively. However, any Morningstar product with their meter bus port, which is an RJ11 port, can be connected via an Ethernet by their accessory, the EMC1. So if you're looking for something rated less than 60 amps, I believe you can go all the way down to the SunSaver MPPT 15 amp and the ProStar Gen 3 15 amp, which would be a PWM and an MPPT version that both have that meter bus port as an option.
And you know what? You just reminded me of something, Errol. The go back to your previous question. The SunSaver MPPT 15 amp actually can do lighting control as well, by the way. It's one of the advanced features in it.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know if they've updated the firmware to know how advanced some of the controls are for the lithium ion, but it might be possible. It depends on how sophisticated the controls need to be, but that might be an option as well on that one. I forgot about that. But yeah, I mean, and again, the Morningstar products are going to allow you to connect to it with the EMC1. Most of their products now have that connection to it. And I think, as a matter of fact, I think the SunSavers and the Sunlights are, I think, are one of the few that don't, that we would normally
Correct.
use. Again, even the TriStars, you can do that to them. If the only product that actually has it built in, as you mentioned, with Morningstar is the MPPT 60. With Phocos, again, with their Dingo, it's an adapter. With some of these other ones, it's an adapter. Not a whole lot have it built in because of the cost associated with it, to be honest. So generally, if you're going to find it built in, it's usually in a more bigger, expensive unit anyway, because it can bury the cost of it in there. But on the smaller unit, generally, it's going to make the unit substantially more expensive, 10% or 20% more expensive to build that into it. So for them, it's better to build a lower cost device and then add that as an option later on. So you'll notice a lot of the manufacturers have done that, whether it be Phocos or Morningstar or others like that one. That's one of the things they've done to try to make their lower products a little more cost effective. As I mentioned before, though, I mean, for the cost of those adapters, it's still worth it. I mean, if it's $1,000 to go visit a site and the adapter costs $150, it could pay for itself real fast. I know I harped on that quite a bit, but I just, being able to troubleshoot these things remotely, it's just a real powerful tool to have. Just really, and again, the money you can save when you think about it down the road is tremendous.
Well, it's clearly the direction that the market's heading. And so if you want to stay at the forefront and current, you should probably start thinking about IoT and networking, I think is my kind of 2 cents on it.
No, I agreed. And again, I see that going everywhere, which is why I try to spend some time on that and harped on it a little bit. Again, if you want more details on that, visit our remote control or remote communications webinar. And again, if you want help with that, we're here to support you on that. We can actually offer that to you. If you don't have the communications already set up, we can do that for you. We've got a cell modem option for you. You can just buy time. Basically, we're an unauthorized AT&T provider for that. So you can go ahead and just buy data time from us for that. And actually, I think Errol's probably the better person to give you more details on than me, because that's one of Errol's projects.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. So pretty simple. You can get a gateway solution hardware for $200-300, and gateway plans start as little as $10 to $15 a month. So for several $100s upfront cost and as little as $10 to $15 a month, you can have this remote monitoring solution. It's not a big upfront investment.
Yeah,
right, if there's any other,
save a lot of money.
Yep. All right, so I don't see any more final questions. I think we'll let people go. Rob and my contact information is scattered throughout the presentation, our website, on the webinars form, etc. So if there are any other direct questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us directly.
Okay, thank you for joining us today, everyone.
Thank you.